entrepreneur came to us and said, I want to build a steel mill. We said, where? Certainly not the United States, because steel mills are closing left and right. We've been an investor in a steel company that didn't make it. And he said, no, if you have the right technology, modern technology, in the right place, with the right environment, well, you can be successful in opening a steel mill. We looked at the numbers, looked at the data, looked at the facts. Sure enough. So we invested and started a steel mill, which became very successful and is located, called Steel Dynamics Incorporated, located in Indiana today. Then there was a fellow that came to me with the idea to start an airline. He said, you know, we need another airline in this country. I said, that's the last thing we do in this country. Right? There's so many airlines, and all the ones I've seen have a hard time and go bankrupt year after year. He said, no, if you have an airline that has just the right routes and new equipment and the right kind of workforce that's dedicated to the consumer with the right kind of leadership, it can be a success. I said, well, the facts say otherwise. So I turned down the opportunity to be the founding investor in JetBlue. It proves I don't always get them right. But the impact of gathering facts, gathering information, learning about the reality behind the words, has proven to me in the business sector that facts are more important than words, and the results are more important than words. So as you look at the campaign of 2012, you're going to hear a lot of words, but you're going to have an opportunity to also look behind the words at the facts. Now, what should you look at? Well, when the president was running in 2008, he spoke at the Denver convention. You may recall he spoke in front of those Greek columns. I don't think he'll be speaking in front of Greek columns this time because he won't want to remind us of Greece. But he said at that point, he said, you know, we measure success differently. I guess he was suggesting differently than Republicans. He said, we measure progress on the following basis. He said, we measure progress by whether people are able to get good jobs that can pay for mortgages. Well, that's one measure. Over the last 3.5 years, we've seen this economy shed jobs, not add them. Unemployment has been over 8% for 38 straight months. The president said if we let them borrow $787 billion, they'd hold unemployment below 8%. Has not been. We're about 5.5 million jobs short of where we were before the recession, and that hasn't been turned around. So on his own measure, he's been unable to get the job done. Then another measure he suggested. He said you can tell if we're making progress by whether incomes are going up or incomes are going down. Over the last 4 years, the median income in America has dropped by 10%. $3,000 per family just during President Obama's term. That's tough, particularly at a time when gasoline prices have doubled, when healthcare costs have gone to the roof, when food costs have gone up. This is a tough time for the American people. The combination of people out of work or underemployed, median incomes dropping, has meant to a lot of families facing very difficult times. A lot of families that can't send kids to college. A lot of folks that wanted to start a home that can't create a home right now. You got retirees wondering if they can make ends meet until the next check comes in from Social Security. These are tough times in America, in part because of those two failures. Failures to create new good jobs, failures to see rising incomes. Then there was a third measure. The president said we could see if he's succeeding or not by whether or not people who have a good idea are willing to take the risk of starting a new business. And unfortunately, the number of business startups has also gone down during the president's term. Actually, if you look at the years that President Bush was president before the recession, and the years now, we're down about 150,000 startups per year. Some of that occurred during President Bush's last year as the economy went into recession. Some is where we continue bumping along that low level. Some have calculated that had we had the normal level of business startups, we'd have about 2 million more jobs in this country. So those measures have suggested that the president has not been successful on the various areas that he expected to be judged upon. There are others, by the way. shocking. Earlier this week, the number of college graduates that can't find work consistent with their degree up to the standards of a college graduate. 50% of college graduates coming out of college can't find work or can't find work consistent with their skills. Number of people have fallen into poverty, gone from the middle class to poverty at a record level. 48 million people on food stamps, a record level. Foreclosures, 2.8 million, a record level of foreclosures. This has been a tough time for America. Now the president will say that he inherited that, and that's true. He did inherit a recession, but he didn't make it better. His job should have been focused entirely upon getting the economy going. In the business I used to be in, we participated in something we called turnarounds, enterprises in trouble. And we had 3 simple rules for helping turn around an enterprise. We called them focus, focus, and focus. Focus all your effort on the most important thing. And when the president became elected, the most important job he had to do was to get the economy turned around. But instead, he delegated that to the Speaker of the House and the Senate President, Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, and he focused on his own agenda. And that agenda did not make it more likely for people to hire people or the private sector to grow. The president is going to want to take credit for the economy getting better, and I'm convinced it will get better. Every recession ends. Every recession ultimately becomes a recovery. This just happens to be the most anemic and tepid recovery we've seen since Hoover. And one of the reasons is because the things the president did not encourage the private sector to grow and thrive. And as I just tick off some of those things, Obamacare. If you don't believe me on this, go talk to a small business person and say, did Obamacare cause you to want to hire more people or cause you to want to pull back from hiring? Or perhaps only hire temporary workers because you're uncertain of the impact it will have? Everywhere I go, what I hear from small business people is that Obamacare has scared the dickens out of them. That the uncertainty associated with the upcoming cost of this program has made them pull back. So instead of doing something that would encourage the economy and get people to hire, the president unfortunately did something which made it harder for that to happen. Then there was the stimulus itself. $787 billion of borrowing. It could have been entirely focused on getting the private sector to buy capital equipment, for instance. That puts people to work, or to hire people. But instead, it primarily protected people in the governmental sector, which is probably the sector that should have been shrinking. Then, of course, there's some other measures, something known as Dodd-Frank. This was the regulatory reform bill for financial services, about an 848-page bill. I must admit, I don't like any bills that are that long, I have to be honest, because I'm afraid no one reads them. And that the staff that writes them puts in all the things they think are the right things to do, but the Congress people and senators don't take the time to actually read them and understand what the impact would be. In this case, you have a bill that has 848 pages, and there will be hundreds and thousands of pages of regulations that are spawned from that piece of legislation. Much of the idea behind it was to keep those too big to fail banks from getting bigger. What's happened since? The big banks have gotten bigger. And the community banks, those have gotten smaller. And why is that? Well, the community banks can't deal with all the regulation. I was with one big New York bank, and the head of the bank said to me, he said, we have hundreds of lawyers working on and implementing the Dodd-Frank regulations. And I thought to myself, there are not a lot of community banks that can afford hundreds of lawyers. And so community banks have pulled back. Coming out of a recession, it's normally small business that gets the economy going again. And community banks are the ones that loan to small business. But the administration, through its agenda, made it harder for those businesses and those bankers to do their job, to get people working again. Then there were labor policies. There were labor policies that were seen by people in the business world as being anti-business. Why do I say that? Well, you remember the National Labor Relations Board said that Boeing shouldn't be able to build a factory in South Carolina because South Carolina is a right-to-work state. That makes it awful hard for a business to decide to expand, frankly, even in a union state. Let's say a foreign company is thinking of building a factory. When they hear that if they have a factory in a union state that they might be prevented down the road from building one in a non-union state, they might decide not to ever consider putting one in a union state. This chills investment in this country, keeps businesses from growing. This agenda, I could go with a long list, but I've gone long enough. This agenda suggests that instead of focusing on getting people to work again and encouraging small business, the president was focusing on his own agenda to transform America. And that has led to tens of millions of people being out of work or under a lot of stress for longer periods of time than was right. Now we've got an agenda going forward. And the president has put out a plan as to what he thinks he'll do in the future. He spoke at the State of the Union address, said a number of the things that he'd do. Again, what's the disparity between the words and the reality, the record, and the facts? The president says he wants to lower taxes on business. Well, then he's also described the fact that he wants to raise the marginal tax rate on individuals from 35% to 40%. Now you might say, what does that got to do with business? Did you know how many people work in businesses that are taxed at the individual rate, not at the corporate rate? 54% of America's private sector workers work in businesses that are taxed as individuals. So as you raise the tax rate on those businesses, you will kill jobs. Taxes on enterprise make it harder for enterprise to grow. The right course is not to do what the president is doing, but to do instead what he said, which is to actually lower taxes on enterprises and make us more competitive globally. The vice president the other day said he's in favor of a global tax. Not quite sure what he has in mind there. That is not the gift that keeps on giving, the idea of more and more taxes. There's another area. The president said in his State of the Union address, he said he wants to lower regulations. And a few of us sort of gasped because we looked at the first 3.5 years of his administration. And the rate of new regulations is 3 times higher than it was under the prior administration. The president also said that he's in favor of all of the above when it comes to energy. Oh, really? I tried to square that with the fact that the number of leases on federal land for oil drilling have been cut in half under this administration. And the number of permits given to drillers has been cut by 2/3. We're not drilling in Anwar. There was a moratorium on drilling in the Gulf, not drilling in the Outer Continental Shelf as we could. Regulators have been trying to push themselves into the regulation of fracking for natural gas. I actually concluded jokingly that I found a way to square the president's words with the reality of his record. He says he's for all of the above. That means all the sources of energy that come from above the ground. Right? Wind and solar. We all like wind and solar, but I also like the stuff that comes from beneath the ground. Coal, oil, and gas. So, words and record and reality can sometimes be different. There's another